Every Friday morning, a drawing appeared on Atlas's kennel door. Nobody knew who left it there, but the German Shepherd always waited beside it before sunrise. Caleb Rowe first noticed the pattern on a quiet autumn morning when the shelter grounds were covered in a thin layer of silver mist. The world was still waking up. The trees moved gently in the cold air, and the only sounds came from birds above the roof and the soft footsteps of volunteers arriving for the day. Caleb had been bringing Atlas to the local animal shelter for years. The German Shepherd was not just a dog waiting for a home. He was a companion, a listener, and a quiet presence that seemed to understand more than people expected. That morning, Caleb walked toward the kennel area carrying a cup of coffee in one hand and Atlas's leash in the other. Then he stopped. A small piece of white paper rested against the kennel door. A drawing. No name. No message. Just colors and simple lines made by a child's hand. Caleb looked down at the picture. It showed a German Shepherd sitting beneath a large tree. Beside the dog was a small figure holding a blue crayon. The image was not perfect. The lines were uneven. But there was something about it that felt carefully placed, like every mark had a reason. Atlas stepped closer. He did not sniff around like he usually did. He did not look toward the other kennels. He simply sat beside the drawing and stared at it quietly. Caleb lowered himself beside him. "You know something about this, don't you?" he whispered. Atlas turned his head slightly, then looked back at the paper. The shelter volunteers arrived one by one. They noticed the drawing too. Everyone had the same question. Who left it? The answer came a few minutes later when Caleb checked the security camera near the entrance. The recording showed a small child walking slowly toward the kennel area every Friday morning. The child never entered the building, never knocked on the door, never spoke to anyone. She simply placed the drawing beside Atlas's kennel and walked away. Caleb watched the footage twice. There was something unusual about the way the girl moved. She was careful, almost as if leaving the drawing was a promise she had to keep. The next Friday, Caleb arrived earlier than usual. The sky was still dark, and the shelter lights created warm circles across the pavement. Atlas was already waiting. The dog stood beside his kennel before Caleb even opened the gate. He looked toward the entrance, waiting. A few minutes later, the same little girl appeared at the end of the walkway. She held a small folder filled with colored paper. She stopped when she saw Caleb. For a moment, neither of them moved. Caleb offered a gentle smile. The girl looked at Atlas. Atlas looked back at her. No words were exchanged. She slowly placed another drawing beside the kennel door and stepped away. Caleb picked it up after she left. This one was different. It showed Atlas standing beside a house with a bright window. Above the roof, the child had drawn a single yellow sun. Caleb studied the picture while Atlas rested his head against his leg. He did not understand why a child who never spoke kept returning every Friday. But he knew one thing. Atlas understood. And sometimes, a quiet heart can recognize a message long before anyone else can see it. The second drawing arrived on the following Friday, exactly when Caleb expected it. The morning air was cool, and a light fog rested over the shelter grounds like a soft blanket. Before the first volunteer unlocked the main entrance, Atlas was already sitting beside his kennel door. He was not restless. He was not waiting for food. He was simply there, watching the walkway. Caleb stood nearby with his coffee and noticed something he had never seen before. The German Shepherd was waiting for a person, not a routine. The little girl appeared a few minutes later, holding the same small folder against her chest. She walked slowly, her eyes focused on Atlas. When she reached the kennel, she placed another drawing beside the door. Then she stepped back. Caleb looked at the girl and offered a warm smile. "You do not have to be afraid," he said softly. The girl looked at him but did not answer. She only looked at Atlas. The dog lowered himself onto the ground, resting his paws forward as if telling her he was ready to listen. The moment lasted only a few seconds, but Caleb felt there was something meaningful happening between them. After the girl left, Caleb picked up the drawing. This time, it showed Atlas sitting beside a small blue house. There was a window with a yellow light shining from inside. Near the bottom of the page, the girl had drawn a small red heart. Caleb placed the drawing carefully on his desk at home that evening. He had seen many animals and many people during his years volunteering, but he had rarely seen a connection begin with so much silence. Over the next several Fridays, the pattern continued. Every week, the girl arrived at the same time. Every week, she left a new drawing. She never asked to touch Atlas. She never called his name. She simply shared a piece of her world and walked away. Caleb began keeping the drawings together in a small wooden box. Each picture told a quiet story. One showed Atlas walking beneath tall trees. Another showed him sitting near a lake. Another showed a person and a dog looking at the same stars. The drawings were simple, but they carried a feeling Caleb could not ignore. One afternoon, Caleb showed the collection to a shelter volunteer named Maria. She studied the pictures carefully. "She is telling a story," Maria said. Caleb nodded. "But we do not know what the story is yet." Maria looked toward Atlas's kennel. The dog was resting, but his eyes were open. He seemed to know they were talking about him. "Maybe he knows already," she said. Caleb smiled slightly. "That would not surprise me." Later that day, Caleb reviewed the shelter records to learn more about the girl. He discovered her name was Lily. She lived nearby with her family and had visited the shelter before, but she had never spoken much with the staff. The information raised more questions than answers. Why Atlas? Why every Friday? Why drawings instead of words? The next morning, Caleb noticed something different. A new drawing had appeared earlier than usual. It was placed carefully beside the kennel door before the shelter opened. This time, the picture showed Atlas standing beside a little girl holding a box of crayons. Behind them was the shelter building. Caleb looked at Atlas. The German Shepherd was already watching the drawing. Then he looked toward the empty walkway where Lily had disappeared. For the first time, Caleb wondered if the drawings were not just messages for Atlas. Maybe they were messages waiting for someone else to understand too. The next Friday morning arrived with a softer kind of silence. The shelter was surrounded by golden autumn leaves, and the sunlight passed through the trees, creating warm patterns across the ground. Caleb Rowe arrived earlier than usual, but Atlas was already there. The German Shepherd sat beside his kennel door, his eyes fixed on the entrance. It had become a familiar sight. Every Friday, before anyone else understood what was happening, Atlas was waiting. Caleb carried the wooden box filled with Lily's drawings and placed it on the small table near the office window. He opened it carefully, looking at each picture again. The drawings were becoming more detailed. They were not random images from a child's imagination. They were pieces of a story slowly being revealed. One picture showed Atlas beside a house with a garden. Another showed him sitting near a hospital window. Another showed a little girl holding a blue blanket while a German Shepherd rested beside her. Caleb paused on that one. There was something about the drawing that felt different. Not sad, not frightening, just full of memory. When Lily arrived that morning, she held her folder close as always. But this time, she did not immediately place the drawing down and leave. She stood near the kennel and watched Atlas. The dog remained calm. He lowered his head slightly and moved closer to the door. Caleb noticed Lily's hand tighten around the folder. It was a small movement, but it revealed something. She wanted to come closer. She just did not know how. Caleb stepped back and gave her space. Sometimes silence needed room to exist. Lily slowly opened the folder and removed a new drawing. She placed it beside the kennel door. Then she looked at Atlas and whispered something so quietly that Caleb almost missed it. "Thank you." It was the first word he had ever heard from her. Atlas lifted his head. His ears moved slightly. He looked at Lily with the same calm expression he always had. Caleb did not say anything. He understood that the moment belonged to them. After Lily left, Caleb picked up the drawing. It showed Atlas sitting beneath the same large tree from the first picture. But this time, there were two figures beside him, a little girl and a man standing together. Above them was a bright yellow sun. Caleb brought the drawing inside and placed it beside the others. Maria looked at the collection and smiled. She is adding herself to the story now. Caleb nodded slowly. Maybe she always was. Later that afternoon, Caleb decided to visit the neighborhood where Lily lived. He did not want to interrupt her family or make her uncomfortable. He only wanted to understand. The address from the shelter records led him to a quiet street with small houses and tall trees. Near the end of the road, he noticed a small wooden fence with colorful drawings attached to it. Many of them showed animals. Many showed the same German Shepherd. A woman opened the front door after seeing him approach. She introduced herself as Lily's mother. Caleb explained the drawings. The woman looked toward the yard and smiled gently. "She has always loved animals," she said. "But after we moved here, she stopped sharing her drawings with anyone." Caleb listened carefully. "Do you know why she started leaving them for Atlas?" The woman looked down for a moment. "Because Atlas reminds her of someone she misses." Caleb felt the meaning behind those words before he even asked. Someone who had a dog? The woman nodded. Her grandfather had a German shepherd years ago. That dog was her closest friend when she was little. After he passed away, she stopped talking about it. Caleb looked at the drawings in the yard. Suddenly, every picture felt different. They were not just drawings of a dog. They were memories searching for a place to belong. When Caleb returned to the shelter that evening, Atlas was waiting near the kennel door. Caleb sat beside him and placed the newest drawing on the ground. Atlas looked at it quietly. The fading sunlight touched the paper, and for a moment, Caleb felt that everything finally made sense. Some messages are not meant to be explained. Some are only meant to be felt. The following Friday arrived with gentle rain falling over the shelter grounds. The drops moved slowly across the windows, creating small trails of water that reflected the warm lights inside. Caleb Rowe stood near the office door, holding Lily's drawings in his hands. He had spent the entire week thinking about them, not because he needed to solve a mystery, but because he wanted to understand the quiet story hidden between every line and color. Atlas sat beside him, watching the rain. The German shepherd had become part of the shelter's morning rhythm. Volunteers opened doors, cleaned the rooms, and prepared for the day, but everyone knew where Atlas would be. Beside his kennel, waiting. When Lily arrived, she carried no folder this time. Instead, she held a single sheet of paper carefully with both hands. Caleb noticed something immediately. She walked closer than she ever had before. Not all the way to the kennel door, just a few steps closer. Atlas remained calm, lowering his head slightly, as if greeting an old friend. Lily looked at Caleb, then at Atlas. "He looks like him," she whispered. Caleb stayed quiet. He knew the importance of letting her choose her own words. Lily placed the drawing beside the kennel. It showed a German shepherd sitting beside an older man on a wooden porch. The two figures were looking toward the sunset. Above them, the child had drawn small birds flying across the sky. Caleb looked at the picture and felt the weight behind it. This was not only about remembering a dog. It was about remembering a person. "Was this your grandfather?" Caleb asked gently. Lily nodded. "His name was Thomas." She looked at Atlas. "He had a dog named Max." The name stayed in the air for a moment. Atlas lifted his eyes toward her voice. Lily continued slowly. "Max used to sit with him every day. When my grandpa was sick, Max stayed beside him." Caleb listened carefully. There was no sadness in her voice, only a memory she had carried quietly for a long time. "After he was gone, I thought I forgot what it felt like to have that kind of friend," Lily said. Caleb looked at Atlas. The dog was still watching her. "Maybe you did not forget," he replied. "Maybe you were waiting to remember." Lily looked down. A small smile appeared for the first time. It was not a big moment. No dramatic change. Just a quiet expression from someone who finally felt understood. Later that afternoon, Caleb and Atlas walked with Lily around the shelter garden. She stayed several feet away at first, but Atlas adjusted his pace. He walked slowly enough for her to follow. Near the large oak tree, Lily sat on a wooden bench and began drawing again. This time, she did not draw alone. She asked Caleb for a blue crayon. "Why blue?" he asked. Lily looked toward the sky. "Because my grandpa said blue meant there was always room for a new beginning." Caleb smiled softly. Atlas rested beside the bench while she continued drawing. The rain stopped, and sunlight moved across the wet grass. The shelter volunteers watched from a distance, careful not to interrupt. They understood that some moments were too gentle to be touched. Before leaving, Lily placed the new drawing beside Atlas's kennel. Caleb looked at it after she walked away. It showed a house with two windows. One window had a small figure inside. The other had a German shepherd resting beneath a tree. At the bottom, Lily had written her first words on any drawing. "Thank you for staying." Caleb looked at Atlas. The dog was already lying beside the paper. For a long moment, neither moved. The shelter was quiet. The rain had passed, and Caleb realized that Atlas had not only been waiting for Lily's drawings. He had been waiting for Lily to remember that she was never alone. The following Friday arrived with clear skies above the shelter, replacing the quiet rain from the week before with warm sunlight and a gentle breeze. Caleb Rowe opened the gate that morning and immediately noticed something different. Atlas was not sitting beside his kennel door. The German shepherd was standing near the small garden behind the shelter, looking toward the path where Lily usually appeared. Caleb stopped for a moment. It was a small change, but with Atlas, small changes always seemed to carry meaning. "You are waiting somewhere new today," Caleb said softly. Atlas looked back at him, then returned his attention to the walkway. A few minutes later, Lily arrived carrying her drawing folder. But this time, she was not alone. Her mother walked beside her. Caleb greeted them with a smile, and Lily slowly approached Atlas. The dog lowered his head and waited. No hesitation, no uncertainty, just the same calm connection they had built over many Fridays. Lily opened her folder and removed a drawing. It showed Atlas sitting beside a second German Shepherd beneath the same large tree. Caleb studied the image carefully. "Who was the other dog?" he asked. Lily looked at the picture for a long moment. "Max," she said quietly. It was the first time she had spoken the name without hesitation. Her mother smiled gently. "She has been drawing Max since she was very young. After my father passed away, those drawings were the only way she wanted to remember him." Caleb looked at Atlas. The dog was watching Lily, not the drawing, almost as if he understood that the person mattered more than the picture. Over the next few weeks, something beautiful began to happen at the shelter. Lily started staying longer. At first, she sat several feet away from Atlas and drew quietly. Then she began reading short stories beside him. Atlas never demanded attention. He simply stayed close. Sometimes he rested his head near her shoes. Sometimes he watched the pages move in the wind. Their friendship grew without needing a single explanation. One afternoon, Caleb found Lily creating a larger drawing on a table near the shelter entrance. It showed 3 figures standing beneath the oak tree. A girl, a man, and a German Shepherd. "Is that your grandfather?" Caleb asked. Lily nodded. "I wanted to draw him with Atlas." Caleb smiled. "Why Atlas?" Lily looked toward the dog resting nearby. "Because he feels like the kind of friend who stays." The word stayed with Caleb long after she left. He had heard many people describe loyalty before, but coming from Lily, the meaning felt different. It was not about never leaving a place. It was about making someone feel they were not forgotten. Later that evening, Caleb sat beside Atlas outside the shelter. The sun was setting behind the trees, painting the sky with soft orange and gold. He held Lily's newest drawing in his hands. "You know," Caleb whispered, "I thought she was leaving these pictures for you." Atlas rested beside him. Maybe she was leaving them for herself. The dog looked toward the shelter door where Lily had walked away earlier. Caleb understood then. Atlas had not only received drawings every Friday. He had created a safe place where someone could share memories without fear. The drawings were no longer messages from a silent child. They were pieces of a friendship that had learned its own language. And every Friday morning, before the world became busy, Atlas still waited by the door. Not because he expected a picture, but because he knew someone special would come. The next Friday morning arrived with a feeling Caleb Rowe could not quite explain. Nothing looked different at the shelter. The same trees stood along the walkway. The same morning light passed through the windows. The same sounds filled the air as volunteers prepared for another day. But Atlas seemed different. The German Shepherd was waiting beside his kennel door earlier than ever, watching the entrance with quiet attention. Caleb had learned by now that Atlas noticed things before people did. When Lily arrived, she carried her drawing folder close, but there was a hesitation in her steps. She stopped near the entrance and looked toward Atlas. The dog immediately stood. Not quickly, not excitedly, just calmly, as if he understood that this moment required patience. Lily walked closer and placed a new drawing beside the kennel door. Caleb picked it up after she stepped away. This picture was different from all the others. It showed Atlas sitting beside an empty chair under the oak tree. On the chair was a small blue blanket. Caleb looked at Lily. "Who is sitting there?" he asked gently. Lily looked down at her hands. "Nobody anymore." The answer was quiet, but it carried a story. Caleb sat beside her on the wooden bench outside the shelter. He did not ask more questions right away. He simply waited. After a few moments, Lily opened her drawing folder and pulled out an older picture. The paper was worn at the edges. The colors had faded slightly. It showed a little girl sitting beside a German Shepherd. "This was Max," Lily said. "He was my grandpa's dog." Caleb looked at the drawing carefully. "You drew this a long time ago?" Lily nodded. "After Max was gone, I thought I would forget him." She looked toward Atlas. "Then I saw him." Caleb understood. Atlas was not replacing Max. He was reminding Lily that the feeling of being loved by an animal could return in a different way. That afternoon, Caleb brought a small wooden frame from home. He placed Lily's first drawing inside and hung it near Atlas's kennel. The volunteers gathered around and admired the collection of pictures that had slowly filled the wall. There were drawings of Atlas beneath trees, Atlas beside houses, Atlas watching sunsets. Every picture represented another step between silence and trust. Maria, one of the shelter volunteers, smiled as she looked at the wall. It is amazing how one dog can bring so many people together. Caleb nodded. He never tried to. Maria looked at him. That is probably why it worked. Later that day, Lily asked Caleb something unexpected. Can I draw Atlas with my grandpa again? Caleb smiled. Of course. She sat at the small table near the garden and began drawing. This time, she added something new. There was the oak tree. There was Max. There was Atlas. And there was Lily standing between them. Caleb watched quietly from a distance. He noticed the difference immediately. The earlier drawings were about remembering something that was gone. This one was about accepting something that was still here. When the sun began to set, Lily placed the drawing beside Atlas's kennel door. The dog walked over and rested beside it. Caleb stood nearby, watching the quiet moment unfold. He thought about all the Fridays that had passed, all the drawings left without words, all the questions that had slowly found answers. Sometimes people believe healing arrives with a big moment, a grand change, a perfect explanation. But Caleb had learned something from Atlas. Healing often arrives quietly. It arrives through a child holding a crayon, through a dog waiting by a door, through a small drawing left every Friday for someone who knows how to understand. The following Friday morning felt different from all the Fridays before it. The shelter was no longer a place where people only came to find animals or complete daily tasks. It had become a place where small moments carried meaning. Near the entrance, the wall beside Atlas's kennel was now filled with Lily's drawings. Each picture represented a memory, a feeling, or a quiet message that only a few people understood. Caleb Rose stood there with a cup of coffee, looking at the collection while Atlas rested nearby. The German shepherd no longer waited because he expected a drawing. He waited because Friday had become a reminder of connection. When Lily arrived, she carried her folder as usual, but something was different. She walked beside her mother this time, and she was smiling. It was a small smile, but Caleb noticed. For someone who had once communicated only through paper, that tiny expression felt like a beautiful step forward. Lily approached Atlas and sat on the grass a few feet away. She opened her folder and began drawing without hesitation. Atlas watched quietly. He did not move closer. He did not need to. He understood that being present was enough. After a while, Lily turned the paper around and showed Caleb the picture. It showed Atlas standing beside a house with a garden. There was a little girl holding a blue crayon. There was also a large tree with birds above it. Caleb looked carefully. This one feels different, he said. Lily nodded. It is my new home. Caleb smiled. That is a beautiful picture. Lily looked toward Atlas. I think Max would like him. Caleb sat beside her. I think Max would be happy that you found a friend. The words stayed with Lily for a moment. She looked at Atlas, and the German shepherd slowly placed his head on the ground near her. It was a simple gesture, but Lily understood. Over the next few weeks, Lily began visiting the shelter more often. She started helping volunteers organize supplies, clean the garden area, and create new drawings for the adoption center walls. She still loved drawing Atlas, but now her pictures included other animals too. A small cat near a window, a bird resting on a branch, a puppy playing in the grass. Caleb noticed something important. Lily's world was becoming larger again. The drawings were no longer only about remembering the past. They were becoming about seeing the present. One afternoon, the shelter director asked Caleb if Atlas could become part of a community program that helped children feel comfortable around animals. Caleb looked at Atlas, who was sleeping beneath the oak tree. I think he has been doing that already, he said. The first event was held on a bright Saturday morning. Families arrived at the shelter garden, and children sat on blankets while volunteers shared stories about kindness and patience. Lily stood beside Caleb, holding a drawing of Atlas. When it was her turn to speak, she looked nervous. Caleb did not interrupt. He simply stood nearby. Lily held up the picture and said, "Sometimes you do not need words for someone to understand you." The garden became quiet. Atlas looked toward her voice. The German shepherd slowly walked over and sat beside her. No one rushed to take a photo. No one tried to make the moment bigger than it was. Everyone simply watched. Caleb felt something warm in his heart. Months earlier, He wondered why a little girl left drawings at Atlas's kennel every Friday. Now he knew. The drawings were never just for the dog. They were a bridge between a child and her memories, between the past and the present, between a heart that was healing and a friend who never asked for anything in return. As the afternoon sun moved across the shelter garden, Lily placed her newest drawing on the wall beside Atlas's kennel. This time, there was no empty chair, no missing figure, only a girl, a dog, and a tree standing together beneath a bright sky. And for the first time, Caleb realized the story was no longer about what had been lost. It was about everything that had been found. The Fridays continued, but something beautiful had changed. The drawings that once appeared quietly beside Atlas's kennel door were now part of a larger story shared by everyone at the shelter. Caleb Rowe noticed it every time he walked through the entrance. People no longer passed by without looking. They stopped. They noticed the wall covered with Lily's artwork. They noticed the German shepherd resting beneath the oak tree. They noticed the small moments that had once been easy to miss. One Friday morning, Caleb arrived with Atlas before the shelter opened. The air was cool, and the garden was covered with tiny drops of morning dew. Atlas walked slowly beside him, stopping near the wall of drawings. The dog looked at each picture for a moment, almost as if he recognized the memories hidden inside them. Caleb smiled. "You know, you started all of this." Atlas looked back at him with calm eyes. A few minutes later, Lily arrived carrying a larger piece of paper than usual. She walked toward the kennel with confidence now. The little girl who once stood far away from Atlas had learned that she was welcome. She placed the drawing on the wall and stepped back. Caleb looked at it carefully. This picture was different from the others. It showed the shelter garden, the oak tree, and several people standing together. There was Atlas in the center. But this time, the German shepherd was not the only focus. Everyone was connected. The volunteers, the children, the families, the animals. "What made you draw everyone?" Caleb asked. Lily looked at the picture and smiled. "Because he brought everyone together." Caleb felt those words deeply. Atlas had never tried to become important. He had never searched for attention. He simply stayed patient, and somehow patience became a place where people felt safe. Later that day, the shelter held a small gathering in the garden. It was not a celebration of one dog or one story. It was a gathering about kindness. Families brought homemade snacks. Children shared drawings. Volunteers told stories about animals that had found new homes. Lily stood beside Caleb as she watched people gather around the wall of artwork. "Do you think he knows?" she asked. Caleb looked at Atlas resting nearby. "Knows what?" "That he helped me." Caleb was quiet for a moment. He looked at the dog who had waited every Friday morning without knowing what would happen next. "I think he knows you needed a friend," Caleb said. And I think that was enough for him. As the afternoon continued, a young boy approached Atlas carefully. He had seen how Lily interacted with the dog and wanted to try. Caleb showed him how to sit nearby and wait. Atlas stayed calm, allowing the boy to understand that friendship was not something forced. It was something built. Lily watched with a smile. She understood that feeling better than anyone. That evening, Caleb placed the newest drawing inside the wooden box at home. The collection had grown from a mystery into a memory. He looked through the earlier pictures one more time. The first drawing with the tree, the house with the yellow window, the empty chair, the picture of Max, the final drawing with everyone together. Each one represented a step, a quiet step, a healing step. Before going to sleep, Caleb stepped outside and found Atlas lying beneath the stars. The German shepherd lifted his head as Caleb approached. "You changed a lot of lives," Caleb whispered. Atlas rested his head again. The moment was peaceful. No answer was needed. Some friendships are built through words. Others are built through waiting, understanding, and simply being there when someone needs you. And every Friday, beside the old kennel door, a reminder remained. A small drawing, a loyal dog, and a story that began with silence but ended with everyone feeling heard. Years later, the wall beside Atlas's kennel door remained one of the most meaningful places at the shelter. The drawings had faded slightly from the sunlight, but Caleb Rowe never allowed them to be removed. Each picture carried a memory. Each color held a moment that changed someone's life. The German shepherd who once waited beside an empty kennel door had become a quiet symbol of patience, kindness, and the power of being present. Caleb still visited the shelter every Friday morning. Some routines were worth keeping. The world around him had changed. The trees had grown taller. New families had moved into the neighborhood. Children who once visited the shelter with their parents now brought their own stories to share. But one thing remained the same. Atlas still waited near the door, not because he expected a drawing anymore, but because Friday had become a reminder of the friendship that began with silence. Lily was older now. Her folder of drawings had become a small collection of memories she proudly shared with others. She still visited the shelter, but she no longer stood far away. She walked beside Caleb and Atlas like she had always belonged there. One afternoon, she brought a final drawing. It was larger than the others and placed inside a simple wooden frame. Caleb looked at it carefully. The picture showed the shelter garden beneath the oak tree. There was Atlas resting peacefully. There was Lily holding her blue crayon. There was Caleb standing nearby. And above them, the sky was filled with birds flying toward the sunlight. "Why did you draw this one?" Caleb asked. Lily smiled. "Because this is where I found my voice." Caleb looked at Atlas. The German shepherd was older now. His movements were slower, but his eyes still carried the same calm warmth. He walked over to Lily and rested beside her. The moment was simple. No big celebration. No crowd. Just a dog, a girl, and a friendship that had grown stronger through quiet understanding. Caleb placed the final drawing beside the others on the shelter wall. He stepped back and looked at the collection. The first picture had been a mystery, a child leaving something behind without saying a word. The last picture was different. It was a thank you, a reminder that sometimes the smallest gestures create the deepest connections. That evening, Caleb drove home with Atlas resting in the passenger seat. The road stretched beneath the golden light of sunset. The fields moved gently in the wind, and the familiar streets of the neighborhood passed by slowly. Caleb looked at Atlas and smiled. "You know, I never figured out how you understood her." Atlas looked toward the window, watching the world move by. Caleb laughed softly. He did not need an answer. Some things were not meant to be explained. They were meant to be felt. When they arrived home, Atlas walked beneath the old oak tree and rested on the grass. Caleb sat beside him, holding the first drawing Lily had ever left. The paper was worn. The colors were softer, but the meaning remained. A child who needed a friend. A dog who knew how to wait. A man who learned that listening could change everything. The stars appeared above the quiet neighborhood, and Caleb stayed there for a while. He thought about every Friday morning, every drawing, every silent moment that became a memory. The story had started with a question: who was leaving the drawings? But the answer became something much greater. It was never only about the pictures. It was about the hearts behind them. Because sometimes the smallest act of kindness does not make a sound. It simply waits by the door until someone is ready to understand.